welcome to episode 182 of the Dive Down, Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from a few miles west of here, it's the Godfather, Dave Harbarger.
Back from vacation and back into quarantine, it's me, Dave, and this time I'm not sick. This time it is everybody else in my house that is sick. So I'm in my basement, hiding out.
Where you belong.
Well, yeah, where I belong, hoping I don't catch COVID again for the second time in 3 weeks. So, yeah, here I am. Looking forward to doing literally anything to take my mind off of everything that's going on upstairs right now.
Yes, Dave is here. Shane is not. Shane's on vacation. He's in the Pacific, riding a dolphin into the sunset. So to fill his very comfortable seat, we have a returning guest, friend of the show. You know him. You love him. He's the leader of the NRG Series leaderboard. It's Zach Allen. Hey, Zach.
Hey, how you guys doing today?
We're doing so good. It's nice to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk some Modern today.
Modern is hot. And that's what this week's show is about. It's a little bit of a rehash. If you heard last week's episode featuring Tandy, all about the Pioneer metagame, what you should know, what you should play, and maybe what you should avoid, we're doing a similar thing today with a modern twist, trying to figure out what people can be thinking about as they prepare for their local RCQs if they're playing Modern to try to get into DreamHack Atlanta. So we've invited Zach to help us do a check-in on the state of the Modern format, figure out what's good based on recent results, what we think is evergreen, what Zach likes, maybe find out what Zach is playing.
Well, I won't be playing this week, but I will. I mean, I'm happy to talk about the deck I would register, yeah.
I have an inkling of what you might like from your recent results, but I'll be curious to hear if you're sticking with it or going a different way. So
sure.
Get into it. But yeah, and you actually have a tournament that you wanted to talk about this weekend, and I assume that you might not be playing because you'll be running it. Is that right?
That is correct, yeah. So, just wanted to mention off the top this weekend, so 7/16, for those looking for an actual date. We're having an RCQ at my store, Galactic Toys in Grand Rapids. It's the biggest one on this side of the state. So if you're kind of in that Midwest area and want to play some Modern this weekend while queuing for the Pro Tour, you should come check it out.
Absolutely. And if you've never been to Grand Rapids is a very cool city. I've been through there a few times. I love Michigan, the west side of Michigan, despite some things I might have said the last time I was on the show talking about Michigan. But that's just because I'm from Ohio, so I have that fun Ohio-Michigan animosity sometimes. But it's great.
Definitely a rivalry between the two states for sure.
There is. But we can have friendship on this podcast. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Zach, what's your shop like? I mean, is it going to be a really big RCQ? I'm imagining if you're there, it's going to be super competitive and people are there because they mean business.
Yeah, I mean, it's an RCQ. You're going to qualify for the Pro Tour, right? That's the purpose of it. The shop I'm at is pretty big, actually. It's gigantic. We just spent a lot of time upgrading it so we get WPN premium. So we got brand new tables, brand new chairs. It looks pretty sweet. So I've got some people trying to put together a coverage team this week. Got I don't know if everybody knows, my friend Steven Dykeman asked if he could do it yesterday, so I think we'll probably have him doing it and try to find him a partner. So you'll be able to watch it too if you're out there. See some people try to play Modern to qualify for what I guess is a Pro Tour. DreamHack Atlanta is not a Pro Tour, but kind of a Pro Tour.
Yeah,
a lot of prizes at it. So
I think you're qualifying for a chance to qualify for the Pro Tour.
Okay,
right now.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it feels to me like it is more of just the when they ended the Pro Tour right before COVID hit, where they had the regional Pro Tours, where there was one in Europe, one in Japan, and one in the US. I think it was Phoenix, maybe. It feels kind of like that, where it's a mini regional Pro Tour. Mm-hmm. So, even if it's not the actual Pro Tour, I think there's a ton of prizes on it. I think they put a bunch of money for it, and I don't know, cool event to play in regardless.
That's awesome. By the way, Steven, who you just mentioned, did Steven win the RCQ that you were at yesterday, Stan, in Evanston, in Chicago?
I believe he did. Yeah, I think he won on Mono Red Obosh, actually.
Is that right, Zach?
Yeah, that is right.
Yeah.
And right after he won, he was planning to play the event. Right after he won, it's I can do commentary now.
That's awesome.
Oh gosh, this is going to be sweet.
Fantastic.
But yeah, he's been really working on Pioneer. So looks like he took down a big event yesterday, crushed it. He'll be in Atlanta. I saw a couple other people qualify too. This is getting exciting again. It's been a long time since we had something like this in Magic. It's cool to see people qualify, you know?
Do you have ambitions of trying to qualify for the regional championship?
Oh, I'm certainly going to try. I'm not going as hard as I probably would have gone 5 or 6 years ago, but I'm going to give it a shot. All the energy events have qualifiers at them. I'm kind of locked into going to those now just based on how the first part of the season has gone for me so far. So
Yeah. And the unbelievable showing in June in particular.
that was a good weekend for me. Yeah, that one went well.
Yeah.
But I had some frustrating ones before that, so it was good to actually kind of get on a little bit of a hot streak there for a little bit. So
That's awesome. So yeah, if you're in the Midwest, if you're in Western Michigan, you want to go check out the store that Zach works at, 716. It's a modern RCQ, right?
yep, it's modern.
And what's the name of the store again?
Galactic Toys.
Perfect. All right, check it out. All right, so we're going to hop into the
You don't even have to be in Western Michigan, right? Like you can be in parts of Canada. You can be in Eastern Indiana, Western Ohio. Like we've got a highway
You can be in
system.
Chicago. It's not a far drive from Chicago. I bet some of the Chicago grinders are going to find their way over there as well.
Oh, I'm sure they will.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we could definitely have a lot of people. I know some people from Indiana already said they were going to come up. And Indiana's just the Midwest in general is a really big modern state. I just can remember 5-10 years ago, it's like any event that was modern in the Midwest was like guaranteed to be 1,000+ people. Like any of the bigger ones. We just love it here, you know.
All right, we're going to get into more of that in just a minute. But first, let's do some very quick housekeeping. We got some great Patreon activity. New patron Matthew M. joined us. Matt is a local to Chicago, actually. He top 4'd. He came in 4th at the Evanston RCQ. So congrats, Matt, on a 60-card Elementals deck with like a weird Kahira transformative sideboard. No Kahira game 1, Kahira games 2. Yeah. So congrats, Matt, and thank you for joining the Dive Down Nation. And also thanks to Anders B for going up a tier in their support. Appreciate everyone. If you'd like to support the show, you can join us over at patreon.com/thedivedown. You can also support us while playing Magic with a Mana Trader subscription. Use coupon code TheDiveDown15 to get 15% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. And if you're playing an NRG or if you just want to save some money on cards, you can use coupon code DIVE8 to get 8% off any order from Nerd Rage Gaming. That's right. It was true last week. It's still true. The official podcast of the Nerd Rage series. Zach, I don't know if you heard, but you're contractually obligated to talk to us now whenever we put a microphone in front of you at one of these Nerd Rage trials.
Look, man, if you guys want to come and see me there, I'll be there. I'm locked in. I'm all put in the calendar. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, we'll definitely be there for that one. Yeah, and like Shane and Stan talked about last week, or we talked about last week, I talked about last week through time travel before I went on vacation. You can expect to see us popping up around the series and us doing event breakdowns and things like that. But use that code, like we said, if you want to get a discount and help Nerd Rage Gaming, one of the stores that I think is helping save paper competitive play through a great regional series. All right. So let's hop into it from here. We talked a little bit a couple minutes ago about what's going on with RCQs, but for people who don't know, this is kind of week 2 of the RCQ season for DreamHack Atlanta. It's the first step on the path to the new Pro Tours that we talked about. Qualifying events can be of kind of any format, like we talked about. In Atlanta, it's Pioneer ultimately, but there has been a lot. I know there's been some sealed tournaments. I know there's been Pioneer ones, and there's certainly been a lot of modern tournaments where people are trying to qualify for moving up to the regional qualifier from here. I felt like there was a lot of excitement. Zach, you said that you were excited people were qualifying for things. It seemed like there was just a lot of talk. Do you feel like a lot of your kind of friends who are into competitive Magic are starting to re-engage a little bit more recently, or what do you think's going on there?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I haven't seen, there was a bunch of big Magic tournaments before COVID, but there really, there were some in the last 3 years, but not very many. And locals especially had been smaller just in general. And I played one of the first RCQs the last week. I think it was like July 3rd before the holiday. And it was like an 80 it capped at 80 people. It's a Pioneer event. It was really, and people seem to be just excited to battle against their friends again there. You know, like it's like the driving local event that Magic players have wanted for a while. They kind of got rid of the PPTQ system a while ago, and it just hasn't really felt like there's been a stage like this at the local scene. And oh man, it's great to have it back.
Yeah. I think one thing that's really interesting too is that it feels to me a little bit, I'm mostly a Moto player for what it's worth. You know, I don't get out of the house a ton. I stay in my basement to hide from my family. And even the Moto leagues have a lot more people in them than they have late leads. So Pioneer, every time I go in there, has about 900 people, which I think it's triple probably what it was before the DreamHack was, the Pro Tour was announced as a Pioneer format. But even more surprisingly to me is that Modern last night, I heard from some people, I didn't have a chance to log into Magic Online myself, had more than 1,700 people in the league last night, which is up quite a bit from, for example, when we did our last People's Meta episode where we really talk about, the full, dissect a deck dump. It had been hovering around 12 to 1,400 people. So I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that people are pretty excited about both Pioneer and Modern as formats right now, which is great.
Oh, yeah. And to be fair, Pioneer is in an awesome place right now. It just feels like a fresh format, a good format. They had a really surprise banning kind of out of nowhere on Expressive Iteration and Winota. And, I'm usually pretty critical of Wizards banning announcements, but I think they nailed that one. They got that so right, and it's made the format great, in my opinion. There's still some stuff they could do, maybe, but it's in a really good place. It's fun to play. The matches feel interactive and back and forth, and it doesn't really feel like any specific archetype is too dominant at this point. Maybe the Phoenix decks and the green decks are a little strong, but I think it's kind of within the normal range of like a best deck. So I think that format's really cool. And Modern is just Modern is starting to feel a little stale, but it's still a great format. Lots of interactive games, lots of really skill intensive format right now, which.
That was one thing I wanted to ask you kind of off the top is, as someone who is a long time known lover of Modern as a format, what do you think the character of Modern is right now? Like, do you think it's skill intensive, or what do you think it kind of is at a high level? What's driving the format?
Well, so I actually feel this is the closest Modern has ever felt to a standard format to me, which is kind of weird to say, but it's just so much narrower than Modern formats of the past, where Modern's kind of always had a best deck, but there's always been tons of different decks kind of in the tiers of it. And right now it doesn't really feel like there are. It kind of feels like there's only 3 real archetypes you can play, in my opinion, maybe 4. And that's kind of how standard typically feels, right? Where there's 3 to 4 like main decks, and then they'll go through iterations and changes week to week or whatever. Play some different things, but it kind of feels like you're just picking an archetype and trying to build it for that weekend, and that's just how standard always felt. And I think a lot of the really good players in Magic's history would tell you standard's always been one of the most skill intensive formats.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot easier to just get a big edge on a format that small than it is in a larger format where you just can't physically prepare for as many decks with a 15 card sideboard. So when it narrows down, it just kind of gives you more options, more ways to attack, gives you more stuff you can kind of do for those matchups. And it's made it a tough place to win at the moment, in my opinion. It's people out there taking advantage of that have been doing really well.
I'd love to hear more about what you think these 3 to 4 main archetypes are in the format. Because although I agree kind of with the spirit of your point about how Modern feels standard-esque, especially because of the impact of MH2.
Yeah, MH2 is a big part of that.
Sort of just defining essentially every deck.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very big part of why it's standard, right? It's it is coming from 20 years worth of sets, but, a lot of the format is coming from just 2 sets. So, people say it's Horizon's block constructed or whatever, and it's not quite that, but there's definitely some truth to that sentiment.
Can I guess what you think the top archetypes are?
Sure.
Is it Elementals, Murktide, and the 2 Cascade decks?
Yeah, so
I just Rhinos.
Well, yeah, I kind of lump them into just larger categories, but it kind of just defines those 3 decks anyway. I mean, there's the Cascade decks, which are you choose Rhino's Living End, whatever, but they're both trying to cast this 3-mana spell that's totally unfair and wins the game, essentially, and then pairing that with a bunch of free spells, which is An effective strategy, if you look at Magic's history. Free spells plus win the game spell for 3 mana is a good strategy. Then there's just any Yorion deck, I'd say. Just Yorion is the best companion left in the format, and the companion mechanic is just broken.
Yeah.
So any deck that's playing Yorion is going to be in a good spot to win in this format, essentially. You need to do certain things to take advantage of that. Right now, 4 colors is probably the best, but I've seen some like Yorion, Urza, like Affinity builds that have done pretty well. And I'm sure you could build some other Yorion decks that could have success, but I don't know. I think that's just a category to itself. And then I'd put Ragavan decks as the third, mostly blue-red Murktide, but I do think that just any deck playing Ragavan can win. That card is just outrageous.
Grixis Shadow. So maybe
sure.
when you're thinking about it that way, it's like Grixis Shadows in there. These mono red Obosh decks that we mentioned earlier, like on the fringes of that, are kind of in there too. Although M Hayashi sometimes doesn't have Ragavan in his builds, and sometimes does. But I imagine most people who are going to consider taking that to an RCQ are going to want to play their Ragavans.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ragavan decks.
And I mean, that's it in my opinion. The only other like sort of deck in that I guess hierarchy I'd consider is Yawgmoth, which is like kind of the fourth to me. I guess maybe if you want to say Yawgmoth, you can say green combo, because you can make an argument for Amulet as well, although I don't feel like Amulet's in a great spot, but it's still, it just has explosive draws, so you can win with the deck. So I guess if you want to give it a fourth category, there's the green creature combo decks. I don't know if Primeval Titan's creature combo, land creature combo, whatever.
Yep.
Green combo decks. So,
Interesting. I mean, it's funny because I haven't talked to too many people. I mean, when you look at the results of, for example, like SCG Con Syracuse, right, which is the event that happened today. Today's July 10th. You still see the kind of normal list of decks in the distribution that you expect in the wider metagame. Like the most players are playing Murktide. Then there's a lot of people on Burn is the next one. And then Yorion slots in there. And then because it's paper, you still have people holding on to Amulet Titan, even though I think online that's gotten less popular recently. Grixis Death Shadow, Rhinos, like you said, Living End. It kind of falls off from there. So if I look at the list of all the decks that are above 2% of the metagame, which is what I have in our notes for what it's worth, it's it's kind of the normal spread of decks that you see. But I do think when you start thinking about these in those kind of super archetypes of the 4 things that you just listed out, it's interesting to kind of chunk it up in that way. And I'd love to kind of go through each one of those and kind of talk about why you might pick to play one of those on a weekend, why you think you might not pick to play one of those on a weekend, and kind of what the options people might be thinking about as they consider those decks for RCQs.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it, man. Yeah, it sounds awesome.
The place we have to start when we start talking about Modern right now is with the 4-color Omnath, Yorion, all that kind of area of the decks that are still most effectively abusing the companion mechanic, I think. And I guess the first question I wanted to ask you about this, Zach, is, I think a lot of people still have this feeling that 4-color Blink and to an extent 4-color Elementals, in the way that they're kind of cousins to each other, is really the tier 0 deck. Do you think that it is a cut above all these other decks, or do you think they're all together? Do you think that whenever we're thinking about Modern we have to start thinking about Yorion first?
Yeah, I think there are other decks that are on Yorion's level, the 4-color Yorion specifically. Like I think there's some on its level, but I think it is meta defining. I guess I'd say it is an 80 card deck, obviously playing tons of powerful cards, so it has the most room to change week to week if you want to do that, and like combat a certain meta. It just has all these tools it could add to it if you think that that's right for the week. So, I think it is the best deck. I don't think it's by a wide margin. And I think like if, for example, you think this is a week to attack graveyards and you're like playing a 4-color deck with a bunch of endurance as main, and then you're playing against Rhinos, now all of a sudden you got a bunch of 3-mana 3/4s and they have a bunch of 3-mana 2/4/4s, which is like, 3-4 lines up horribly there. So, it kind of just depends on how the deck's built that weekend, like what it can be. And it feels like it is the best deck, so it has a fighting chance in every matchup, no matter how you customize it. But there's certainly weeks you can take advantage of it, and that there are weekends where it's not doing great, and I think that's when people don't have the build right that weekend.
Yeah. I mean, I think generally most weeks we see it doing pretty well. Although I think it's interesting to note that just as an example, at the SCG Con 30K, both 4-color Blink and 4-color Elementals were sub 50% decks, even though 4-color Blink won the event in the hands of Yichang Jiang. They, it was a 49% deck. It was 6% of the field for Blink, and then 4-color Elementals was 2.5% of the field with 48% win rate, which is pretty interesting. I do think one thing, as someone who doesn't play this deck very much and certainly doesn't love being matched up against it, when I do run into it, it's funny, on Magic Online, you don't see this deck all the time when there isn't an all-access pass, because it's so expensive to play it. So I think it's hard for people to rent it, honestly, or even a lot of times. But this, there's been a lot of iteration in the deck with different plans. If you consider Elementals to be a cousin deck to this, as I kind of think that it is, the weekends where there's more Elementals or a lot of Elementals, and then the weekends when there's less, and essentially those decks are running Risen Reef. Lately there's been this Traverse the Ulenwald package that's been showing up in some of the builds here and there. I've seen some that are trying to do a combo finish, whether it's, Feladar's Guardian and Saheeli, or something different to kind of end the game. Bring to Light Scapeshift I've seen occasionally. And then Emrakul the Promised End, even just as a piece of kind of like anti-mirror tech. Do you think that this kind of evolution in 4-color is driven more by trying to outfox other 4-color players, or do you think it's more about trying to fit for what you were talking about, trying to anticipate where the rest of the meta is going to go?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a delicate dance, right? Like when you're playing the deck, you're like, well, I need to be conscientious of mirrors because this deck is a Yorion deck. It's 80 cards. You are actively aiming to shuffle on every single one of your turns. Like when the deck's humming, you have a Renin 6 in play and you're fetching every single turn. So like it ends up just taking forever to play this deck. So you have to be prepared for mirrors, because there's this weird like time constraint makes it so that winning game one is extra valuable. So like, you kind of have to make these decisions. Like, do I even sideboard for the mirror? Because like the games can be so long that winning game one is like the only thing that matters anyway. And then so like you'll see them playing Emrakul the Promised End main, even though the card is just actively awful in most of the other matchups, because it's like, so they have to make you have to make these decisions when you're registering the deck, and it's when the deck goes all in to combat the mirror and like take the mirror really seriously. It's a really good week to exploit it. That was what I found when I was testing. It was just like, I hope other people aren't like going to exploit me playing Emrakul and just play a bunch of mono red this weekend. But
and is that the best way to exploit 4-color? Do you think it's a surprising thing to me that people often tell me that Burn has a good matchup against it, because Omnath feels like it would make the Burn matchup so bad, but is just getting under it the best way to attack 4-color generally, you feel?
Yeah, I mean, you can get under it with Burn for sure. Some prowessy builds can get under it too. And then there's just a bunch of like unfair decks that are going to do it pretty well too, like Belcher, or I guess I'd maybe put Tron in that category. Like those kind of decks are just going to do something so powerful so quickly that it just doesn't let 4-color get its like loopy value engines going and just beat it before that happens. And then you can beat it with like, we saw it recently, Will Kruger in the Mox. You can beat it with like land-based strategies. Valakut, Amulet can be pretty good against it in certain weeks, depending on how 4-color is built. And yeah, so there are ways to beat it, but the problem with those, like it tends to be like any way that is good at beating this deck is like pretty bad against the blue-red decks and the Cascade decks. So those decks do a really, really good job of like protecting each other's weaknesses, in my opinion.
Interesting. And that's why they kind of float to the top of the meta.
Yeah, anecdotally, after playing a bunch of Burn and Murktide leagues the last few weeks, Burn is actually the only deck that I've been able to beat 4-color with. Just by like being a little faster, hoping they don't draw into Omnath in their 80-card deck, and post board like relying on Skullcrack effects to keep them from like Yorioning me into the ground. Because that's really the only card I'm like truly scared of. Like if they're getting to the point where they've hard casted Solitude, I think the game has already left me.
Probably the Solitude thing is pretty accurate. Like once one's in play, you're probably going to lose, but you're aiming to win before then. And that's why, you say Omnath, and it's like, yes, the games where you get an Omnath going against Burn, like you win every time. Omnath is so good there. But it takes a while to get Omnath down in the deck, and you probably, just because of how the mana's set up, you probably fetched 3 or 4 times, and maybe one of them might have been a shock. Like you don't even want a shock against Burn, but the 4-color just has intense mana requirements, so you end up like having to shock and like fetch shock prismatic ending on 1, fetch shock, play Ren plus on turn 2, and it's like, all right, I have this card that's really good against them, but if I don't get there, it doesn't matter. And when you're starting the game at 14 or whatever, it's tough. That's not very much for Burn. That's what, like 1 attack from a creature and 4 spells. So yeah, I mean, they can definitely get under you. And I've just had it enough where it's like you can't gain life with Omnath on 4. Omnath doesn't gain life until turn 5, unless you like Growth Spiral or something. I've just had the experience many times where it's like, oh, I got the Omnath on 4, slam it, and they'll like untap, play a second Swift Spear, bolt you, attack, lethal.
Right.
Like block 1, but yeah.
Swift Spear.
Something else I'm curious about that you've mentioned a couple of times is like building a deck for the week. And I'm wondering how relevant is that for people who are playing RCQs at the local store level, where you might be more likely to encounter someone who's just like been playing the same deck for years and that just kind of has kept it updated with MH2, or is maybe less likely or doesn't necessarily have the resources to move around between different decks.
Sure.
Just has access to a couple.
But I think there's like 2 things you can kind of look at. Like what is hot, what is popular right now on Magic Online. And I think a lot of the like more grinder crowd kind of follows that pretty well. So if you want to predict what like some of the stronger players in the room are playing, like you can kind of just look at Magic Online results. And it's like they'll probably be playing recent lists that were successful. And that's like the meta game. So like last week's meta game is kind of what you want to prepare for this week in the winners bracket. If that makes sense. But then every store you go to for like an RCQ thing, stores just have their own home players. Like that's just reality. Every store does. And a lot of local players will just have a deck they play. And just, kind of the nature of statistics and randomness, like some stores just have a metagame that's concentrated in a strange way. And that's just the reality, right? Like you go to some store, like that's a store where they have 5 Tron players. So like it's like heavily concentrated Tron weekend, or the one place where everyone likes Burn. So you get 6 Burn matchups or whatever. And like, it's not like it's 100% of the store, but it's just like that, in that location, like maybe this is a weekend where I bring that extra sideboard card for whatever deck I know people are playing here.
But if you're going to an RCQ cold, let's say, hypothetically, it's late in the season, there's one across the state that you like, I can drive there, I've never been to this store before, versus going to an energy trial. How does that influence what deck you choose to play? I
mean, as much as I hate to say it, it's like just play the best deck, whatever you think the best deck is. I think if you actually want to win, you're giving yourself the best chance by playing one of those tier 3, like the 3 tier 0 archetypes, I guess, that I kind of mentioned earlier. And if you have a ton of experience with like a good fringe deck, be it like a Yawgmoth or an Amulet or whatever, and like you just feel really, really comfortable with that deck, then by all means play that. But if you're talking about going to an RCQ cold, I would just pick one of those 3 like tier 0 decks, whatever one you feel like fits your playstyle best, and then get some games in with it and just go from there.
Yeah. And are you configuring it? You're not really trying to anticipate the meta at an RCQ the way you would at an energy, though, where you're not going to try to configure like a 4-color for a specific tool set. Like endurance is probably not going to end up main if you're just going to an RCQ at a store you've never gone to, for example, right?
Yeah, I mean, if a store I've never gone to, I don't know the meta. I'll probably just play like a balanced deck. Like, I wouldn't say I'd play like a bunch of endurances main, but playing like one endurance main or whatever in a deck that has like Eladamri's Skull or Traverse the Overworld or something, that you can talk yourself into a lot of 1-ofs in a tutor deck.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, like I wouldn't go overboard and like, oh, this is the weekend for 4 endurances or whatever.
I saw online that Living End is doing great, so every I think that every local grinder at these small shops is going to end up on living end. That probably won't happen, right? But it might happen at a big tournament where you all of a sudden will have a huge uptick in something like that.
Yeah, in the big tournaments too, you can like kind of predict for the winner's metagame a little better. Like, Magic is largely a game where the better decks tend to rise to the top. So, at like a big event like that, there'll probably be like one person who made it into the later rounds with their pet deck, and then everyone else is playing like a tier 1 or 2 archetype. And the good players tend to play the better decks, and then you can kind of just be prepared to play against exactly those decks in bigger events. But in local events, like your top 8 matchups might be Amulet 3 times. Like you never know. Like it could be anything.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So you said that you had in mind what deck you would play.
Mm-hmm.
Is it still 4-color that you're starting off with, or are you trying to go a different way right now personally?
Oh yeah, for me, I think I would play 4-color. I've actually been impressed with Rhinos, which I wasn't 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I think Rhinos is kind of a close second to me right now. But I would still play 4-color. I think there's like a build going around right now that's got Mishra's Bauble added to it, and it's playing like Traverse the Ulvenwald and some dress downs to like really make sure you have Delirium enabled, and then an Emrakul too. And I've been looking at the decks. I actually think the Traverse is pretty bad. I wouldn't play the Traverses, but Unholy Heat is just unbelievable.
So good.
It's an unbelievable Magic card. So making that thing work is definitely worth it, especially in a format so heavily defined by Wrenn and 6 and Omnath. Like you want your bird spell to deal 4 damage. So yeah, I like getting 4-color with Unholy Heats. Like I think that seems like the place I'd want to be for the weekend, but I think Rhinos has just been really good, and this plan of play 2 4/4s and then back them up with free spells just gets people. Like you don't give them a lot of time, so I think that's an effective deck too.
Yeah,
I'm curious. When you're thinking about 4-color as the best deck in the format, do you think that every deck has potential tools that it can leverage to beat it? Or is one of the things that defines 4-color's power level is that it can just like stomp a bunch of strategies, even if they think they're going to like pack some mystical disputes and dress downs in an attempt to fight it?
I mean, there are some decks that are just never going to beat 4-color. Like, I'm pretty well-known control player, and I tried to play Azorius control for a long time. But that deck's matchup against 4-color is just so bad. It's just like...
Yeah.
After doing it as long as I did, I just kind of gave up. I was like, this is a lost cause. I'm just going to play the very control deck, play some 4-color.
At least you can play it in Pioneer now.
Yep.
Kinda.
Yeah, kinda.
Yeah.
But, for the other decks, the ones that are still here, like they are still here because they can put up a fight against 4-color. Like they are specifically the ones left because they have a shot. And I think blue-red especially, the blue-red like Ledger Shredder Ragavan decks can be a real pain for 4-color. Those matchups are always really close. I think if the blue-red players know what they're doing and play well and are prepared, I actually think they're favored post-board games, which I think wasn't the case when they were not doing the Ledger Shredder stuff. Like the DRC decks, I don't really feel like they just lost too hard to Graveyard Hate.
Mm-hmm.
And now the Ledger Shredder just makes the deck like it gives it another non-graveyard reliant threat that like also helps them always find the right cards and keep their hand consistently in a good spot. It's just very powerful card, and I think it is doing exactly what I needed for the matchup. And it really, it's finally started to make 4-color's like interaction suite awkward, where it was never really awkward against them before. But nowadays, it's like they get enough big threats that you can't Fury and Bolt them, so you're like really relying on drawing Prismatic Ending and Solitude. But those like you only have 8 of those in your 80 card deck, so it's like you're not going to draw that many copies, and they have a bunch of cantrips,
counter spells and cantrips.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like they are going to find their things that resist your removal. So that's another big part of why I want the Unholy Heats right now. But that threat base is really giving them a shot to be quite good against 4-color, and then it gets the boost, like the blue-red decks get the boost of Ragavan on the play. Like there's just this this category, I don't know. You can kind of break games of Modern into two things right now. There's games where your opponent played a Tyrone Ragavan against you, and
Right.
now you know you're in for it. They got, it's going to be easy for them for a little while here. You need to really fight back, or this game's over. And then there are games where they didn't play a Tyrone Ragavan, and then Ragavan starts to look pretty bad.
Yeah.
So,
what happened to the 4-color decks that were running Ragavan for a minute? I remember that they were that was, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago. There were all these Magic Online results where I was like, oh, this is the 4-color Blink deck, but they just have 4 Ragavans in it.
Mhm.
Did it just not? It's just not powerful enough for that in that shell.
Yeah, I think it's like, I don't think it's bad necessarily. Like, if you told me a month from now, like, it just came back in favor and people want to Ragavan back in the 4-color decks, like, I'd believe you. It's just that good of a card, but
yeah.
I think it's just not very good against a lot of what you're playing against, like what's left in the meta. From 4-colors perspective,
yeah.
I guess I'd say
it doesn't really help advance the plan that you're trying to do. Even you know, you're not really trying to close a game aggressively. You do want to ramp. Like, having extra mana is awesome, and having extra cards that you might be able to use is great, of course. But you're not really set up to protect a cheap threat like that out of the 4-color deck necessarily. Yeah.
You're not doing the same like Delver strategy that Blue Red does with it. And it doesn't really fit with your like go long strategy. Like, it is the type of card you really want on turn 1.
Right.
So it's not as good with the like 4 colors just gonna stall with removal and whatever spells, and then get you eventually planned. The deck seems to have. But it's just so good that it's still fine. Like, I just wouldn't be surprised if a deck showed up playing 4-color that had Ragavans and won. Like, it's just so good of a card. You can't ever find that surprising, I guess.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So are you until new cards come out, which it for us isn't until September.
Sure.
And it might only have a couple, right? Because it's a standard set. All things being equal, are you probably playing 4-color from now until something gets banned? Kind of, or yeah.
Which is a shame, because I think Yorion is one of the least fun cards to play with. I mean, it's a fun card to actually play with, like, in terms of casting it in the game, and it being in the game is fun, but just the like 80 card shuffle nonsense that it brings with it is just it's awful. But I think the deck's it's the closest tier 1 deck to my play style, like the way I like to play. Yeah, and it is really good at what it does. So pretty easy decision for me at the moment.
Do people hate playing 4-color, you think, as much as it sounds like they do on Twitter? Every weekend that there's a big tournament, I see a bunch of tweets where they're like, I really don't ever want to play this deck again because all the shuffling and all the mirrors and all that kind of stuff.
No, I think that's real. I've talked to a lot of people who feel the same way about it, that it's just it's a pain to physically play. But I don't know. I mean, you're paying to go to an event that's X number of miles away from you, and like, that's a real commitment on time and money, and there are real rewards on the line. So you want to play a deck that's going to give you a good shot, and that deck does. Yorion, despite how annoying it is to play with, like, it just is that good. It's a really, really powerful card.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that why don't we move on to one of the other archetypes? And I think that the place to go to next, since you were talking about rhinos as being something that you were interested in, as well as, why don't we talk about Cascade and those 2 decks, and kind of what we think about them in the current meta, why you might pick it up, why you might pass on it for the weekend. Let's start with rhinos, since it seems like you've maybe played some of it lately, it sounds like. So you said you felt like rhinos was getting increasingly better positioned. Why is that right now?
It just can actually beat the 4-color builds out there right now. One of Rhino's biggest problems in the meta for a long time was Ephemerate Solitude, where it was like, if it was right, where there's like all these creature heavy metas, Ephemerate Solitude is just so destructive to those decks. Like, it's so brutal to just like, go one drop attack, and they're just like, play a Solitude, exile a thing, ephemerate it, exile a thing, block the other thing. Like, your entire board's gone for 1 mana. That happened to Rhinos. It's like Rhinos would do this thing, and then they'd just be like, ephemerate Solitude, all right, attack you with a 3/2, attack you with a 3/2, attack you with a 3/2, while they're trying to like
get back online. Yeah.
Exactly. And Rhinos doesn't actually recover. Rhinos is like, I mean, it can, but it's not its strong suit. Rhinos is just such a play from a head deck. Like, that's where it wants to be. It's why it's playing Force Negation. That's why it has these free spells. Like, it's just just wants to get a board and then free spell you out of the game. And in games where it doesn't do that effectively, it is not a good deck, essentially.
Yeah. And its interaction is, it's below rate, like essentially. So if you're playing Dead Gone and you're playing Fire and Ice and you're playing Bone Crusher
Petty
Giant,
Theft.
like those are Petty Theft, like those are good cards. Those are all good cards in the spaces that they make sense, but they're all more expensive than you want to be doing in Modern just so you can have your deck work, basically. And that's the thing that I think is the most interesting difference between Rhinos and Living End, really, is that Rhinos has so much more interaction built into it than Living End manages to do in most builds most of the time. They have a few tricky things, but
yeah, definitely. Living End is just, like, they're very similar and very different at the same time. But
yeah,
with Rhinos, the other thing is, like, you really want creature decks to be good, because it is so effective at beating small creatures, because it has those like split damage spells like Fury, Fire, Ice. Like, Rhinos is the deck that wants Hammer to be good, like, more than any other deck in the format. And Hammer's not very good right now, sadly. But
hey, there were 4 of them in the Modern Challenge today.
Sure,
4 in the top 8.
Yeah, and maybe it can come
happens.
back. Like, it could come back, but it's still, at the moment, I don't think it's a very good deck, very well positioned.
Yep.
But because 4-color isn't ephemerating very much anymore, Rhinos can get under the deck. It's one of the few decks that can get under it, and it doesn't lose to endurance the way that Living End does. So,
right.
You can just play its own endurance even.
Yeah.
So it just, it just beats 4-color like a high enough percentage of the time that I think you can just justify registering it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I have seen some 4-color decks now. Some of those have like Chalice in the sideboard, which is surprising to me as well. I always assumed that it was probably to try to be able to fight Rhinos with the sideboard plan more so than, being able to have their main deck fight against it, but maybe that's for other things as well. But that is a card that's more effective against Rhinos, I think, than Living End, for example, where you can attack the graveyard essentially, and do instead.
Well, and also, like, because the deck can struggle against Rhinos, like, you want the Chalices, but then it just gives this 4-color deck so much hate against Living End, which is a deck I would stay away from at the moment.
Living End?
Yeah, like, a lot of people played it because they said it beat 4-color, but I really feel like the 4-color players, at least recently, have responded and like started playing the Endurance's main and then having these Chalices in the board and like other spells to be good against Living End, and it just makes it a tough world for Living End decks at the moment, which is another reason why I think Rhinos can come back, because one of Rhinos' worst matchups is actually Living End. Even though you can play around Endurances, it's a tough matchup for that deck. So with Living End kind of taking a downturn because 4-color is preying on it, it just makes it the better Cascade deck to register right now. Rhinos, that is.
Yeah, I feel like Rhinos being the more mid-rangey plan, it can sometimes use 2 to 3 interactive spells to clear the way for its combo. Like, it can do a Petty Theft and a Force of Negation, or a Boseiju and a Fire and Ice, whereas like Living End is kind of limited to like just what you can get proactively with a Grief, and sometimes a Force of Negation is backup. But occasionally you just like cycle through all your cards, and then all you have is like a bunch of lands and a Cascader, and that Force of Negation is ostensibly dead too.
Yep, and it just, Living End just goes all in on it, right? Like, they cycle a bunch, and like that's their graveyard, and it's not the way it used to be, where Living End used to be this deck where like it was exactly a Cascade spell, a cycler, or a land. Like, those were the only things in the deck, and they were really consistent about putting Living End in play quickly with a big board. Nowadays, like, a lot of the things you're putting in the yard are pitch elementals, which are great. They're great things to put or to get in your graveyard and the Living End back, but they don't cycle. So the deck can actually run out of resources where it never really felt like it could before.
That's interesting. I never noticed that particular change would cause that to happen, but it makes sense.
Yeah, so like if they go all in on doing these things and then you just endurance them, then your endurance comes back and then they have to rebuild, and they're not actually that good at rebuilding as they used to be. So I just wouldn't be playing Living End right now. I just don't feel like it's the deck's time.
Stan, what do you think about Rhinos right now? You were playing it for a good long amount of time as well.
I feel like it suffers from some of the Living End hate, because graveyard hate is not the only way to deal with Living End, and I think the controlled decks, like, have enough tools to deal with Cascade decks as a mechanic that Rhino suffers a little bit of splash damage. Though I would agree that I'd rather play Rhinos just because I think the mid-rangey, more interactive plan stands more of a fighting chance than going all in. Though I will say if Burn gets super popular, then like suddenly I feel like Living End is the way to go, because whenever I play Living End against Burn, it feels like a buy.
That makes sense. Yeah, Rhinos is like kind of hard, or kind of has a hard time against Burn, and Living End just kind of smashes it. So.
Yeah.
So let's say, before we kind of closing out here, talking about the Cascade decks right now, is whether you choose to pick one of these decks up really all about what we anticipate 4-color is going to do on a given weekend, right? So if it's still staying away from Ephemerate, which seems to be the trend right now, if it's also kind of, you're not going to see a lot of Burn, like Stan is saying, how is Rhinos against Murktide, do we think?
I think it used to be very good against Murktide, and since Ledger Shredder has put in, I think Murktide's pretty favored against Rhinos. Yeah, Ledger Shredder just gives them. It used to be like, right, or Blue Red Murktide like really needed a Murktide to beat Rhinos. You got to get this guy in play so you can block the Rhinos and then get some sort of counter attack going. And the DRC plus Ragavan engine that Blue Red uses to close out games, like to get ahead, be ahead, and close the game, was just not effective at all against Fury and Fire Ice and Bone Crusher and Brazen Bar. They just had so many ways to fight those. But the Ledger Shredders can pretty easily get up to X5s against Rhinos, and Rhinos has a hard time with an X5. So now that they have Murktide and Ledger Shredder, they can just block the Rhinos and then get a counter swing in the air and kill them.
I also think it gets like exponentially worse for Rhinos post board.
That's probably true too.
Yeah, after the Murktide player like takes out some bolts and like brings in like better counter spells and more surgical interaction and maybe even a couple engineered explosives, it's just like the Rhinos player has to go through so much hate, where the plan B of like Fury beatdowns, I think, and endurance beatdowns becomes a little bit more relevant.
Sure. So I would agree with that, and I think I don't know. It looks like Blue Red's pretty well positioned, but that can also just still be beat. It's just susceptible to his threats getting killed. So
yeah. So if you're thinking about picking up Cascade, make sure that there isn't, for some reason, the people that you're going to be playing around, if it's a store you're familiar with, are still on the Ephemerate 4-color plan. It's like one thing. Another thing is, if you know that there's going to be a ton of Murktide in your meta, you might want to stay away from Cascade as well. But if you think there's going to be a lot of 4-color, you might be okay to go with Cascade. A lot of 4-color and a lot of maybe roguey decks where you are having an I win combo out of something like Team of Rhinos could be a good place to be for an RCQ. Does that kind of sum it up? Maybe a thinking process someone might go through if they have that as an option in their. Definitely.
And I also think the Cascade decks are the best thing to choose if you don't have a lot of familiarity with the format, because 4-color and Blue Red are both really, really, I want to say skill intensive, but the matchups come down to lining up your interaction right, and that takes knowledge of the format. And that is less true with the Cascade decks. Their interaction tends to be more general and more obvious when to use. It's like, they're going to kill my 2 Rhinos in play. All right, force negation that. I don't want that thing to happen, or whatever it is, So it requires less knowledge of the format to win with the deck. I wouldn't say they're not skill intensive. They still take a lot of skill to play, and to like good players can do even better with them because they just can leverage how the decks play better. But at the same time, if I'm trying to pick something up, I just think it's the easiest place to start.
All right, so I think that's great advice on the Cascade decks. Why don't we go on to the next one of this kind of super archetypes that we were talking about here at our Tier 1, Tier 0, and that is decks that we described as Ragavan, but what we're really talking about here, honestly, really is Blue-Red Murktide being the leader of that pack. Now, Murktide is the deck that Stan played this weekend at Evanston as well, and Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, but Murktide is not a deck that you've picked up a lot in this kind of meta of Modern, right? I'm sure you've played against it a ton, but you've gravitated more towards 4-color as it's gone. Is that right?
I mean, that is true. Having said that, though, like I've played, like I own the deck. I've played it
a
ton of times.
Yeah.
And it's similar to my play style. I think it's even like I really didn't like the Dragon's Race Channelers in there. I know people talk about how Dragon's Race Channelers is this unbelievably good card, but I'm not a fan of it. I don't like this thing has to turn sideways. It's not really my style of card. So,
it has always felt a little awkward to me in that deck because it's so aggressive.
Yep.
And like you have Ragavan, and we talked about there's a zillion reasons why you want Ragavan, but Murktide has always been like, okay, I got to have it turned on, and it's still just okay sometimes when it's turned on.
Yep. Yeah, but the Ledger Shredder change has like really just been a true metamorphosis for the deck, in my opinion. It's just such a more robust threat, and it can play offensive and defensive where Dragon Race Chandler couldn't, and it just gives you this kind of just switch plan that like you can be the control or the beatdown in any matchup you want to be, and lets it just be so nimble to just you're gonna have game against the entire field playing this deck, and oh man, it just has big flyers. Like there's just no other deck that can compete with it in the air. Murktide and Ledger Shredder just can regularly be a 5/7 in the deck, and it's not hard to get it there. And that just is so easy to just like play defensive. Oops, like you're at 13 because I hit you with a Ragavan and a Bolt or whatever, and now I have a 5/7 and an 8/8 Murktide swing, like block for one turn, then swing and kill you. And it's just can just be so powerful. But deck's prepared to kill those threats, like it doesn't do well against, so it can kind of. I guess I would say it's a meta call too, but I don't know. It's good. It's a really strong deck.
Yeah, not to pick a fight or anything, guys, but I'm literally playing for Dragon Race Channeler right now.
I saw your build, and I was like, oh, he's playing 16 creatures. Basically, I was like, okay, because were you playing Ledger Shredder too?
It's 8 1-drops, 3 Shredder, 3 Murktide.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I mean, I would play less DRC and more of the flying threats. If you told me you wanted like 2 of them or something, and the other threats, I could see that. The deck does really want to play from ahead. So DRC is one thing. It's like Ragavan, where it's like, well, when you play this thing on 1, it's going to be really good. But, there's a lot of times you draw it later in the game. And it's like, this wasn't quite it here. I was really hoping I have a thing that can block or whatever. But
well, I'll tell you why I've put together this version of Murktide. Part of it is also just because like I want Counterspell up on turn 2 as often as possible, and just having a bigger density of turn 1 plays, I think just makes that Counterspell plan a little bit more appealing. And to your point, like I totally agree, a late game DRC feels really bad sometimes. So does a late game Ragavan occasionally, and that's where like my 3 Ledger Shredders really like start to show what they're worth, and that's how I start growing them. Is like, yeah, I don't want like a stupid 1/1 because my opponent had a game 1 endurance. It's just like that's one of my favorite ways to grow it in the absence of like a cantrip that I can just as easily.
Yeah, and I don't like. I guess I wouldn't say that you're wrong to play them. Given that like that's the play style you're going for, like it makes a lot of sense. So like it's probably right for you. Me though, like I value the switching in games a lot, and I just feel like the 12 threat Ragavan Ledger Shredder Murktide package with maybe 2 Brazen Borrowers or whatever gives you that ability a little more. So like that's the direction I would go with it. But again, like I like really value people who can create a plan and play to it. Like I think they tend to do really well in Magic tournaments. So like for you, if your plan is like early pressure plus counterspell on 2 plus interaction after that, like that makes sense. Like it's something like if you want to interact or like try to enact, I guess I'd say that makes a lot of sense. You're coming to a tournament with a plan. I like it.
And you mentioned that part of that plan too, when we were talking about this stand right, is that you've actually have you cut all the Archmage's charge to fit creatures or some, or is that how it's turned out?
Yes. Yeah, I'm not playing Charm right now.
I can buy that. There are meta games where Charm is really good, especially like when Hammer was good. Like the blue-red decks really wanted Charm.
Exactly.
Or Shadow, which nobody plays right now, or not many people, but
yeah, I just don't want Counterspell to be the best mode on that spell.
Yeah.
Like I want to be able to like occasionally steal 1-drops, and they're just right now I feel like whenever I'm playing Murktide in leagues, when I was playing with Archmage's Charm, like I would just draw it and like just wouldn't be able to even cast it. And if I could, it was just like I would be tapping out to counter a spell, and then my defenses were down. My opponent would just beat me by double.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I don't hate dropping Archmage's Charm.
I guess my biggest question about Murktide. So since we haven't talked before, Zach, my I'm pretty aggro. Like my playstyle is pretty aggro. Like I was pretty into like blue-red prowess, and I try to bring prowess back all the time. So this meta right now, like these decks at the top of the meta for me have been kind of a hard transition for me to like stay super hyped about modern. As much as I love modern, it's hard to stay super hyped about all these decks. So Murktide is the deck that I've started to, kind of gravitate towards the most. But the thing that's always bummed me out a little bit about Murktide is just, number one, it's always the deck that's the most represented in like every meta. It seems to be the things that's the most represented. And also it feels like when we get a good look at a meta where we get to see like the match win rate at aggregate for a big tournament, it's always sub 50%. And what do you think about that? What do you think is going on there where the deck still performs well in the hands of some players? It's still top eights, but a lot of times at the aggregate, it kind of doesn't look as good.
I mean, I would say that it is that, like, it's just not, it's not playing as many powerful cards as some of the other like decks in the format that are like going to bail you out of situations by themselves. So like it gives you all the tools to win, but like there's no I win card in the deck, I guess I'd say. So like you really, really need to know how to put these tools together. And I think, if you are playing it without very much experience, that can be hard to do sometimes. And it can be pretty easy to get outground by a deck that's just going to kill all your threats. So I think some of the best players can really put everything together with the deck and produce some good results. But if you aren't super familiar with it, it can be tough. It can be tough to win with. So I think a lot of people want to play it because it feels like the cantrip deck, like the very consistent, like I'm going to always get to play a game style of Magic that a lot of people like. So it's always going to be represented. But, that also means that, you're going to have good players playing it and bad players playing it. And it's going to be all across the spectrum. And that can just, that's never, when good players and, when everyone in the tournament from any skill level is playing it, it's going to have a hard time getting far away from 50% in either direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly, I think, the most successful shell for Ragavan and Modern right now. Definitely. Like it's kind of not even close, right?
Yeah, I think I would agree. Yeah, I mean, pretty much have to agree with that. I guess Shadow is kind of coming back, and there's, reasons to play Shadow at the moment, which I think ends up being a really similar deck to this deck anyway. I don't
totally.
It's almost the same threat package, and it's basically like his counter spells or hand disruption better on the weekend. Whatever. So,
yeah, I was a chat. So my aggro-ness led me to like I played Shadow for a long time too, in addition to Prowess. Those are kind of like the two main decks that I've played over the last couple of years. Why it was kind of what led me to Murktide as well, and it did strike me how close they are in playstyle a little bit. But the thing that's been really fascinating to me is just how much easier it is to deal with the mana base in this. And so I was curious, why do you think that Shadow is having a little bit of a resurgence as people look for another way to play Ragavan?
I think the Shadow's matchup against 4-color has always been better than Blue-Red's matchup against 4-color. And when Shadow lost Luris, it was really struggling to figure out what the deck was going to look like going forward. It didn't have good builds yet after the Luris ban. And now that people are coming out with this like Ledger Shredder build of Shadow that involves, basically Ledger Shredder plus Shadow plus Ragavan, and in some cases Murktide, in some cases DRC.
Kroxa is still hanging around in most of these too.
Exactly. Yep. So whatever the threat package is, it's like it's definitely containing Ledger Shredder now.
Right.
And that has really given the deck a resurgence. But they play so similar that it's hard for me to like say one is so different than the others. I do think that overall you'd rather have Thoughtseize against 4-color just because of how Enter the Battlefield focused the deck is. It's just a really good way to effectively beat Solitude or beat Omnath, where a lot of spells like aren't effective at trading with those cards. So I've liked Shadow's matchup in that perspective. In fact, it's one of the few decks that has felt hard for me with 4-color.
Mm-hmm. Which is fascinating because I think when people anticipated decks, Solitude-based removal packages coming out, they thought that was just going to spell the end for Shadow, right? Like this card just kills Shadow every time. It messes up your ability to cast other shadows. Even like it can kill more than one shadow. Like so it's It's a real thing, but it's been interesting to see that people feel like it has a good matchup there because of Thoughtseize. And I think one of the big things from this section too, we're just talking about these kind of decks, is just Ledger Shredder's made a huge difference for all of these Ragavan decks somehow, which maybe didn't seem like it was going to happen like on its face, but it makes a ton of sense when you look at how these decks play.
Oh yeah, and looting in these style of decks is just so good.
Yeah,
it is really. I mean, I know looting as an effect in Magic is just something that's been slept on for a long time. In terms of its power, like, you know, there's the classic, you want card advantage, or even card selection where like, you know, a ponder or whatever you scry to. And looting doesn't have that. It, like, you know, Faithless Looting got this rap for like not really having card advantage for a long time, and then people realized like, oh wait, this is just a really powerful fair card you can play. And it's kind of the same with Ledger Shredder. Like, yes, it grows. Yes, that's part of the card, and it is a big part of the card. But the sculpting your hand is just so hard to measure, like the power of that in a game, but also just so powerful. So it can kind of it gets undermeasured by players, I guess, a lot. Just like how effective that is at keeping you in a game interaction when you need it, and just making sure that your games aren't lost to like, oh, this is the game where I drew a lot of spells and no lands. It's the game where I was flooding a little bit, but I got to discard a couple lands and draw some spells, and all of a sudden it's just a fine game again.
Yeah. And Dragon's Rage Channeler helps you with that some too, right? Because of the surveil triggers, but it's just so much easier to kind of, it's just a much better threat, really. Ledger Shredder is, and it's not graveyard dependent anymore. You know, it doesn't die automatically like to a lava dart, for example, when you play it on without delirium. So there's just a lot of, it's an interesting kind of shift that happened there for sure. But Ledger Shredder's certainly been an all-star every time I've tried to play it. So it's still a card that I'm annoyed I didn't anticipate how good it was going to be on the spoiler when I saw it, for sure. Because, you know, everybody, I think a lot of people looked at that and saw, oh, the set mechanic is on this. We can just ignore it because it's the set mechanic. But
well, and it also just reads like the set you know, when you're reading it, it kind of reads like the set mechanic is like this throw-in on it.
Right.
Like, it's like, oh, and it has connive, but it's like, it turns out like the way it's set up, like it feels like it wouldn't do it that often, because it's like, you know, the player has to cast 2 spells in that turn or whatever. But because it's either player and it's modern, where there's just all these free spells anyway, like, and it's not just like it's the second instant or sorcery, it's like the second spell. Yeah. So, you know, also Cascade's like a big part of the format. Like, that's always 2 spells. Like the card just triggers way more than it looked like it would have when you were reading it in spoiler season. So I don't know. Yeah. All-star from that perspective.
Terrified of playing this card in paper. I got to be honest. Like, sure. I haven't gotten to play any paper since Streets of New Capenna came out, and I'm like, I'm going to miss so many triggers.
It is awkward. I've seen, just walking around the RPTQ I was at, I saw a lot of people missing triggers that happen from their opponents.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't feel like people miss their own triggers very often. Like, they're usually like, I'm going to play 2 spells and then connive. And they do a pretty good job of that. But it's the, like, opponent lightning bolts your guy and then counter spells your spell, and they, like, forget to connive there or whatever.
Right. And that you get to resolve it before and all that, you know, all the timing and stuff, of course.
Yep.
The other thing I think that's so interesting about it is, like, we talk about how hard it is to kill because it's 3 toughness when it comes down. It usually gets to 4 toughness that same turn. I can't think off the top of my head of like how many other creatures we've gotten in the last year or two that are such good blocks, and like it can both be a really good defender to just keep you stable and protect you against like a 4/4 Rhino even, that can then, when you're ready to close out the game, like turn sideways and suddenly hit for 3 or 4 in the air next to a Death Shadow or even a Murktide or whatever else.
Card's just great.
All right, so to wrap up these decks, and we won't really talk, maybe we'll have a minute to talk about the mono red kind of Ragavan decks a little bit later, those mid-rangey ones, but this is kind of, if you're someone who likes to play from ahead, likes to be a little bit more on the creature threat kind of side, you're not trying to grind, you want to have interaction, these are the decks that you can pick up and play, and this is kind of like the best class of that kind of deck in the format right now.
Yep.
Yep.
For sure. And I think it's particularly just so brutal for non-meta decks to beat blue-red. Like, when you show up with Belcher because you were planning to beat 4-color, like, you're probably going to beat 4-color, but wow, do you want to stay away from blue-red? And kind of the same with Living End. Like, Living can get blue red game 1, but post board when they don't have Bolt or Unholy Heat, and now those are Fluster Storms. Like,
Right.
good luck.
Yeah.
They just boarded in Fluster Storm and
and
it hurts
unlicensed
against you.
hearses.
Like, hope you can win quick because you're not winning a long game.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mostly wanted to play it because I just wanted to play Counterspell and Lightning Bolt again, like I did when I played the deck in 1994, So,
Sure, yeah, sure.
All right. So, last one that we had in the top tier here, and maybe this one's a transition to kind of the second tier decks, is Yawgmoth. And that's mostly on the merits of what seems to be a really persistent, good match win performance from this deck at high level events. Now, Yawgmoth, for me, is a deck that I will never, ever play. It is way too complicated for me, and my paper collection is definitely nowhere near owning this deck, but it has been a slow build to being the best creature combo in the format, and just one of the best consistent performers, especially over the last 4 or 5 months, I would say.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's really good. I will say this deck is so bad against Fury. I actually played it at an SCG, I want to say 3 months ago at this point. I think it was SCG Pittsburgh, maybe? Maybe Philadelphia. It was Philadelphia. There was an SCG in Philadelphia three or 4 months ago. Played it there. I just got Furied into the ground. And with Rhinos coming back, Rhinos is a Fury deck. Murktide, I don't think plays Fury main, but often has him in the board. And then 4 colors, a Fury deck. With Fury decks being out there, like, y'all can have a hard time. And it can be a good choice. I don't think it's very good against 4 color or Murktide now. I think it was a lot better against Murktide when Endurance kind of hosed Murktide. Now that they have Ledger Shredder instead of DRC, that's not really as true. And I found the deck loses to Murktide's Flyers a lot. But yeah, it had a really good matchup against Hammer, and Hammer is banned. So I don't know. I feel like it's just a really powerful deck, like clearly worthy of being in Modern's like decks you consider pile, but also it's just not well positioned right now at all, and it's not going to do very good against a lot of the top decks at the moment.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about how like the Fury interaction plays out in practice when you're also talking about a bunch of undying creatures. Or is it in part just because Fury will clean up all the mana dorks and then like the Rhinos will just stonewall the undying creatures?
Yeah, so it's kind of all of it. It's like to actually deal with these, like if you were going to play red base removal in a Yawgmoth, you're just really going to lose to Undying. Like that's just the reality. But the Undying creatures aren't large. So like you can either have the game where they drew a lot of mana dorks and they were like counting on mana dorks to like fuel a Court of Calling based hand or whatever. And now all of a sudden you Furied 4 mana dorks. And it's like 0 mana to kill 4 cards. It's just outrageous. But it can also be the type of thing where it's like, oh, I've got 2 bolts and a Fury, and they've got like 2 mana dorks and 2 Strangleroot Geists or whatever. And then you like Fury, make both of the Strangleroots undie, kill their other 2 things, and then bolt the Strangleroots, and now again they have no board. And like you didn't spend very many cards to do this. It's just 0, like it's Pyrokinesis or whatever. It's just so good against them.
Doesn't Wall of Roots kind of like complicate that somewhat, just because
Wall of Roots
can
certainly
like,
can. I would agree that can complicate it. But the other problem these decks have is just it's hard to get a Yawgmoth in play against the Unholy Heat counterspell deck. Like effectively anyway, it's hard to like, oh, I have 3 creatures in play already, so when I play Yawg, I can sack them and do these sacrificial draw value loops that Yawgmoth likes to do. That Yawgmoth really wants to play Yawgmoth onto a board that already has other creatures, and it's just so hard to do against blue-red. Like you're either playing it onto a board that doesn't have creatures, or you're not resolving it on your boards that do have creatures. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't like the Yawgmoth side versus blue-red at all.
This feels like the specialist deck, really, that's among these 4 kind of decks that are doing really well like right now. And like I said, this one might be a half tier below the other 3 that we just talked about, but this is like the deck that really rewards you, I think, for practice and just kind of like being a person who loves doing these kind of fidgety sacrifice aristocrats kind of stuff.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I think there's a certain style of player that's going to love this deck. They're going to gravitate towards playing it. And honestly, it's a good deck. Grist is a very, very powerful Magic card. And I actually found when I was testing the deck that a lot of the games you won in the deck came from just playing quick Grist. And then it was like this like immense threat you're putting your opponent under. Like Grist is just going to keep putting stuff in play and killing their things and threatening an ult and just really put a lot of pressure on the opponent. And then because they have to start like really casting a lot of spells to try and keep up with Grist itself, now the way is clear to get Yawg into play, and then you just win from there. The deck's really good at doing that, but the hands that don't have Grist can just be pretty underwhelming sometimes. Like I've just played against the deck a lot where it's like, all right, they have a bunch of mana dorks and then like a Strangleroot Geist and then like a Grist and a Yawg. But if I answered the Grist and the Yawg, then they just have mana dorks and a Strangleroot Geist, and like, you know, those are fine cards in the grand concept of the deck, but like they are not nearly as strong as the cards 4-color is playing, and they're just going to get destroyed by a 4-color deck as the game continues on from there, right? So
yeah, and I think as far as the purposes of our discussion here, like, why would you pick up this deck to play for an RCQ? Because you're someone who already plays this deck all the time is why, right? Because you need a graduate's degree in Yawg to be able to, I think, really want to play it at high level. I mean, take whatever you want if you're going to have fun, but if you're thinking about trying to win, that's not a place that you want to pick up a deck like this for sure.
I will say it is really, really good into a field that's not particularly interactive. When you're playing against like a lot of like Charbelcher / Tron / Amulet / whatever, like decks that aren't going to kill your board or interact with your board, it can be extremely strong. And it also is like particularly good against decks that aren't interactive with you and not combo-y. So like Burn, or I guess Amulet, or not Amulet, Hammer is like kind of combo-esque, but it's not really. Like against those small creature decks that are just like trying to attack, like Yawgmoth destroys those decks. So if those decks start making a comeback, like it might be a really good call. But just the way the meta is right now, where it's just all these decks trying to interact with you with burn spells and solitudes, like it's not the time for it.
I will say I went 1-2 drop at EGC. My win was against Yawg, where I kind of just ran them over with Murktide. Especially post board, like once I take out my Ragavans and Spell Pierces, it feels like every card against them is just so good.
It's really tough. And Yawg, like it really doesn't want to see the card in Holy Heat, because it's just one of the few ways it's like actually a good answer to Grist in the format. It's really tough for the deck.
Sounds to me like you really like playing on Holy Heat right now.
Holy Heat is, I mean, arguably one of the best removal spells ever printed.
Fully agree.
It's very, very good. You do need to be able to, consistently trigger Delirium, which, kind of goes without saying with the card. But when you are doing that, it just feels like you're supposed to be including it. And, like I said, I think putting Bobble into 4-color, like I'm happy to put this random artifact cycling monstrosity that is Urza's Bobble in my 4-color deck just to turn on Heat, because Heat's that good.
Yeah. All right. So we got a little bit of time left. Why don't we take a look at the kind of the best of the rest, or maybe not even the best of the rest. Maybe we just talk a little bit about the most interesting of the best of the rest right now, because, we could talk a little bit about Burn and Tron and Hammer, all decks that we feel like are in various states of being good or bad right now. There's lots of anecdotal results we can say. Like I said earlier, Hammer, there was four Hammer decks in the top 8 of the challenge this week. Burn was the second most represented deck at SCG Con. Tron, God love it. Tron just never seems to go away, regardless of what's going on, and especially if you're playing in paper, especially with people who maybe haven't played paper in 2 or 3 years or played a ton of Modern in a couple of years. There's going to be Tron players there. There's going to be Jund players at this kind of level event all the time. Do any of those old format staples stand out to you as something that you feel like would be something you would consider right now when you look at that list of kind of the decks that were good 6 months ago, 8 months ago, kind of?
I could make like the podcast thing and just say one, but honestly, no. Like I just would play one of the tier 1 decks.
Yep.
But I will say about Hammer, Hammer's in a weird spot right now. And you'll notice, like, for a long time, it was Modern's premier deck for like a good 6 months while Lurrus was legal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it just has not recovered from the Lurrus ban yet, in my opinion. Like, people just have not found the consensus best way to build it. And I think if you just look at the deck, it just still feels like people just like took Lurrus out, it's still like the same builds where it's like all the same cards. Like we built it around his companion restriction, and now like it's basically the exact same list it was when there was Lurrus, but they have like a Cauldra or something in there, like one Nettle Cyst or whatever.
Yeah,
and it's like
the kind of Crusher bot lists who is really into some of those 3-mana artifacts and Culture Complete. Yeah.
And I do feel like it just needs to reinvent some way. I'm not sure what that exactly looks like, but it just feels like it needs something else, and it just hasn't found that yet. It kind of feels like it's in the same spot Shadow was right before Ledger Shredder was printed, where it's like, oh, what is Shadow doing now? What threats? And then, oh, Ledger Shredder, boom, perfect. Now we have our threat base, the deck's back.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I played Shadow in that spot at SCG Dallas, and it was not the right thing to do. And then, as soon as Ledger Shredder came out, I was like, oh, cool, I don't have to play Kaido main anymore,
Yep, sure. And I do feel like Hammer's kind of in that same spot, but it just hasn't found that thing yet. And I haven't put enough time into Hammer to know, but like either there's some old cards that we don't know about that are like perfect for the deck and people just aren't experimenting enough, but they'll find it eventually because it's modern and we always find these things, or the card isn't printed yet. And maybe, I don't know, we've got Brothers War coming up. We've got Dominaria United. Those do historically tend to be artifact-based sets. Maybe there's a chance Hammer's going to get some upgrades in the near future and be a deck again, but just for right now, it's just really not, in my opinion. And it's weird because Urza's Saga, I still think is one of the best, just most powerful cards in the format by a mile.
Yeah, so, I would note it's interesting that of the decks that we talked about, of that top tier, that is the card that's sort of missing from those decks right now, right? None of them run Urza Saga.
Yep, and I did say earlier that if I was going to play an artifact deck, I would play a blue-white Yorion version that's playing Saga and would be like affinity based with Thought Monitors, and Urza.
Yeah.
And I think those style decks actually have a lot of potential and just haven't been found yet either. But I don't know, the companion mechanics are just so good. So like ways to make a lot of mana and use Yorion powerfully are really good. And you see 4-color doing it with Omnath in Yorion, and those decks can do it with Urza in Yorion. So I wouldn't be surprised if that style of deck wins a tournament in the near future. Like I think if someone finds a good build for it, they easily could.
Yeah. I mean, those blue-white affinity decks are around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're solidly kind of tier 2 right now. People are into them. I haven't seen too many that have Yorion in them too, but it makes a ton of sense. Like you said, Companion's broken, Yorion's broken. Try to find a way to make it work, and Urza can enable that. So I like that call. Stan, what do you think about these as far as like, was anything interesting to you that you saw at the RCQ that you were at or anything like that?
Well, I got knocked out by Tameshi Combo. I thought that was interesting. I had no idea what I was up against game 1 until they cast Tameshi, and I was like, now I know this card and deck exists, and yet I know nothing about
how are you going to Lotus Bloom me over and over again? Isn't that what it is?
That's exactly what it is. And eventually he's just like going through his cards very politely, and I just stop him and say, do you have an infinite loop that you can demonstrate or a deterministic kill? And he's like, yes, I'm just going to do this, and this. And I was like, let's go to game 2. So I thought that was interesting. I do think it's like noteworthy that there were 8 hammer decks in today's Modern Challenge. And I'm curious, like, if we can try to infer what it was about that deck, whether it was this week or today specifically after the results of yesterday's challenge were shared out, that, players like Laplastion and other excellent Moto grinders, like, identified an opening for this deck that just, the only list I saw so far is Laplastion's, like, it's not doing anything innovative. Like, it's just a blue-white version that's trying to maybe recover the loss of Yorion, what's the nightmare cat? I've already forgotten her name. Yeah, trying to recover the loss of Luris a little bit with Reality Chip, perhaps, but like otherwise, it's just like go fast, try to win as quickly as possible, so that you don't have to like try to grind.
I have no idea. I looked at some of the lists. I mean, I think Laplastion was even playing for a 4 of Ingenious Smith. And I was like, I thought that card wasn't really efficient enough. I mean, I've definitely played against it in some of these kind of like white affinity lists or blue-white affinity lists that are kind of like, that made that card huge, you know what I mean? But I don't think that that's something that's going to suddenly make it hop back up to the top of the meta or something like that. I love the idea. There's something there with that core. There's something else there with Urza Saga. I just don't know what it is right now.
Yeah, I mean, Hammer Time's like, it's still good. Like, it was the best deck in Modern while Luris was legal. I think. And Lurrus obviously is a huge blow. I mean, that is an unbelievable Magic card. And there's still something there. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the deck is unplayable by any means. It's obviously still good. There's stuff happening there, but I just don't think the right build's been found yet. So it's like, if you told me you wanted to work on Hammer Time and you were like, I'm going to put some time into it and see if I can figure this out. Like, I tell you, that's probably a worthwhile thing to do because it is the type of deck that you can easily take down a tournament with if you get it right. Maybe that's what's happening in the builds from today. I haven't actually looked at them yet, but I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe someone found it. If we have the build and it's good to go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to chalk. I personally, after flipping through it, I'm going to chalk it up to variance, or maybe just a bunch of something happened where there was, not as much. There wasn't as much solitude floating around or something.
Half the top 8 though, like
it's really good players were on it too, like you said, Lapis Gen. But I don't know. We'll have to see how it develops. But this happens in top 8 in challenges all the time. There'll be a challenge where all of a sudden there's 4 living end decks in the top 8, and you're like, okay, I guess And that is the type of stuff that, like Zach said earlier in the episode, will influence an NRG trial or will influence the real spiky players who go to these RCQs to be like, okay, I love Hammer Time. This happened over the weekend. It's time for me to sleeve up Hammer Time and see what happens because I was really good with it 6 months ago, and I'm just going to try it. Like that definitely can happen, but I don't think there's been a definitive reason for it to happen, though.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I also find interesting about Lapis Gen's blue-white list is that, so Harry MTG from Midweek Metagame, he's a streamer, check him out. He's been talking about lately why Hammer is struggling post-Lurrus is because it, in his opinion, has the worst top decks in the format. Like, if you're just living out the top of your deck, you're never really going to recover. And I wonder if part of the plan now is just like play a dredge strategy game 1, like get there as quickly as possible, as linear and aggressive as you can, and just like spell pierce is going to be your protection to like kind of get your combo through. And then post board, it's a very clean sideboard where you have like Lavinias and Teferis to deal with Cascade decks. It's just like the surgical answer to 0 mana spells. Then you have Prismatic Endings and March of Other Worldly Lights if you need to like deal with a problematic permanent that you're worried about on your opponent's end. Some extra 1-drops for Urza Saga, and like Nettle Assist if you need to go big with your Stoneforge Mystic. And I wonder if they just maybe like cleaned up their games 2 and 3 to deal with whatever people might throw at them to try to solve the problem that you have by not being able to grind anymore.
So Zach, before we let you go, I did have 1 or 2 decks I wanted to ask your impression of that are in this kind of sleeper area. And one that's been having a lot of stuff going on the last couple of weeks is Indomitable Creativity. First off, what do you think of this deck? Just curious. And also, is there a particular reason that might be getting more popular suddenly right now? I think that a lot of people think it has a good matchup against 4-color is kind of the main reason, I think, but there's been a lot going on there over the last couple weeks.
Yeah, I think it probably does have a good matchup against 4-color, especially the ones using Valakut. Like, land-based kills against 4-color are tough for that deck. So if you're going to, like, Indomitable into, like, Primeval Titan plus Valakut, like, that is just really, that's a problem for 4-color. So I don't know. If you're building it that way, I think it can be great against the deck. And it is the kind of thing you want to be doing to beat that deck. You either want to get under it or go way over the top. And this is going way over the top. I don't actually think the Archon of Cruelty or whatever, I think it's Archon of Cruelty.
Yeah, the Archon versions.
Yeah, it goes far enough over the top. So, like, I would stay away from that. But, like, if you are going to prime time in Valakut, like, I can get behind it, I guess.
Yeah. We didn't talk about Titan either, for what it's worth. That didn't pop up on my list of things. Titan solidly tier 2 right now, right? But like you said, land-based kills are good.
Yeah, the deck is just struggling right now with the way 4-colors switched this like dress down Unholy Heat Solitude version, and that's like really what Titan wants to stay away from. And Titan's also gonna have a really tough time beating blue-red because they just have Blood Moon, and on top of Blood Moon, a bunch of counterspells and flying threats.
And they've dressed down too quite often. Yeah.
Yep. And it's just not the right time to be playing Amulet. it's still a powerful deck. It's doing some really powerful things, and it can have the most absurd like turn 1s, 2s, and 3s in the format. Not really 1s so much, but some of the best turn 2s and 3s in the format. But it just, I don't like its matchups right now.
Stan, any other decks you wanted to chat about before we kind of break?
Yeah, I mean, do you think the new Cascade deck with like Omnath Elementals, do you think has the legs to keep up with the other Cascade decks that have proven themselves?
I think it's probably worse than them because it's a little less interactive, but it's going to be fine. Like anytime you're doing what those Cascade decks do, which is just free spells with like a game-winning 3-mana spell, it's going to be good. But yeah, I don't know. I think overall I'd rather play the other two, but maybe it's better than Living End right now. I don't know. I think it's certainly one that you like has a pedigree. Like it's close enough to decks that are doing great that I wouldn't say you're wrong for playing it.
Yeah, I like how it's just like Cascade is good, Omnath is good. Why not have both?
Exactly. Hey, we're even going to put Risen Reef in this one for you.
Risen Reef's a heck of a card.
It really is.
For decks that are trying to exploit these elementals, it is very, very good with those.
Or just get a ton of permanents on the board for some reason.
That works too. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Zach, any last thoughts about people that you might offer to people as they're thinking about getting ready for their RCQs? Do you want to tell people to stay hydrated, bring some snacks, that kind of stuff? Or
I think everybody does give those, but I am really big on the staying hydrated thing. I've actually bought like hydration supplements that I bring with me to events now, and it's been really good for me, I guess. I feel like I've been really prepared at my events, whereas I feel like some of the people I'm playing against have struggled in later rounds, and I just have felt prepared. So,
hydration supplements, is that like smaller bottles of water?
No, I feel like a refillable water bottle and these like little tabs that are essentially just like what's in Gatorade Zero, but they're just in like a tablet form. You just plop it into water and then just like it's like carrying like 6 Gatorades or whatever to an event. So you just stay really hydrated. You're good. But I do think people forget, like, it's one thing to sit at your house and play Moto and like be able to take like a break and like, in between rounds 3 and 4, I'm going to go eat a meal or whatever. Like that's all well and good, but in actual paper tournaments, like they get longer and you don't necessarily have time to like go eat. So like remembering to take care of yourself matters, I think. And I think it's the type of thing, people overlook always, but it matters in those big events. So you should probably do it.
I definitely joke about it because it is what people say, but every time I go to a big event, like I do always find myself at like round 3 being like, I have got to do something, like either it's getting a Gatorade, like you said, or it's getting some food. Like I do have to remind myself to do it. So yeah, keep it in mind.
Yes. Can we do this Unban talk?
Do you want to do the Unban talk? We're down for it if you are. Yeah.
Let's do it. Yes.
Okay.
I love Unban talk. Everyone else hates it, but it was always like my favorite thing to just get into it about some Unbans.
Okay. So in case people don't know what Zach is talking about, I threw in some notes at the end for us to have a little bit of fun here with a tweet that well-known Magic. Well, first off, I really think he's more of a lifestyle brand right now. Andrea Mengucci. I'm jealous of everything he has on Twitter, the trips he takes, the food he eats.
Aside, the food is so good.
His EU citizenship.
Aside from the fact that he was, former world champion and all those kind of things, he's an excellent player and a nice guy. But he put out a tweet that was basically, he's been playing more and more Modern lately. He plays a lot of everything. But he put up a kind of a tier list for unbanning cards. Now, there's a lot of Modern cards to go through. We're not going to talk about all of them. Needless to say, he has a category that's called Never Unbanned with a lot of stuff, a category with Consider with Caution, and a category that are cards that are wrongfully imprisoned. And there are 10 cards in the wrongfully imprisoned bucket. Now, Zach, since you wanted to dive in, I saw that you mentioned in a tweet that you agreed with most of the things on this list. And they're surprising ones for me, but I would love to hear the ones that maybe, your impression of this or maybe what you'd be most excited to have unbanned from this list.
Well, I mean, I agree to a lot with, to a large extent with some of the things he said. I will say there are some cards that are just like, I don't know why this is still banned, like Green Sun Zenith for one. It's like, why is this card banned? Like, can we unban Green Sun Zenith to give the green creature decks something? Like, they feel like they need it. Maybe Birthing Pod's too good, but like, come on, Green Sun seems totally fine to me.
Not worried about people ramping into Dryad Arbor with it or something like that.
Sure, go for it. I fury you. Yeah, fury you, Stone Rain you. Like why did you do this? So yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's totally fine. I really think Preordained is still just unfairly banned for no reason. I think it got banned in like 2014, and that's like 8 years ago. And when it was banned, it was one of the best cards in the format. And now if it gets unbanned, I don't even think it's a 4 of in any deck in the format. Maybe Blue Red Murktide plays 3 copies. Maybe it's good enough that you play 4. I don't know. But if the card's on the ban list, I'm not even sure I want to play 4. Like,
yeah, makes you wonder a little bit.
I mean, yeah. And then another one for me is I feel like Dark Depths could be unbanned too.
So I saw this in your tweet and I was like, wait, what? Dark Depths? Just because it's not easy enough to enable here to really probably be a warping combo, you think?
Yeah, I just think it's slow in Modern. You don't have some of the like really busted cards that like Legacy plays with it, like Chrome Mox or Mox Diamond, like these ways to like really get it going fast. And it's just a 2020 that is going to get owned by every white removal spell people are already playing. And the deck, like, built that way is going to be really weak to Blood Moon, which a bunch of decks could also play. And I don't know, maybe it gives Primeval Titan decks a boost, which is, like, not that big a deal because they're not very good anyway. So I don't know. I think that one could be unbanned. Maybe unbanning Dark Depths plus Green Sun and, like, the same unbanned would be
a lot.
An exciting leak dump.
Yeah, it'd be a lot, but like it would also be really interesting for the format. Like there'd be just so many new decks people would try.
I think that so one thing that I'm feeling from some of what you're saying here too is just maybe using the unbanned list to try to shake up the format a little bit, which I think was a fair goal, honestly, in the moment that we're in right now in particular.
Yeah, it's just really stifled right now. Modern Horizons was just such a powerful set. It's just so hard to understate how powerful that set is and how format defining it is. And it's like almost every single card on this list was banned before those cards existed in this format. And maybe with like a normal set, like you can be like, oh, well, it was broken before a normal set came out. It's still going to be broken. Like a set like Modern Horizons, it's kind of like, oh, well, we should maybe relook at some of these because they probably were too good when they got banned. And now that the format is what it is, they probably just aren't. They're probably just fine. Like, another one that he has never unbanned that I've been saying for 3 years should be unbanned is Umezawa's Jite, which is just like, I don't know, totally fine in my opinion. I don't even know if it's good. Like creatures already get really punished by Fury and Solitude, and like Jite would punish them more, but like to use a Jite, you have to put it on a creature. So like I think it's the type of thing that a creature deck could use to exist in this format that's really hostile towards it. And at least give you some game against like those pitch elementals. Like you can, it's probably not great for you, but like if you get hit in with a Jit and they Solitude you can at least like kill the Solitude with the Jit counters, and then like there's some back and forth there. So I don't know. I can see that one coming off. And then there are some other ones on there that are just like, you could probably unban these because they weren't really the problem to begin with, like his wrongfully imprisoned thing.
Yeah.
But also like, do we need to? Yeah. Like, they're not like.
I can't.
I mean, Golgari Grave Troll.
I cannot abide unbanning that card.
It's the only card on this list that's been banned twice.
I do think Punishing Fire could come back. I don't even think it's very good, but I think it could come back.
The one that's really a head scratcher for me on his wrongfully imprisoned list. So there's 2. So like Astrolabe and Field of the Dead, I'm kind of like, I don't know about unbanning these. And these are, just to be clear, these are in Manguchi's wrongfully imprisoned area where he's kind of advocating for them to be unbanned.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Field of the Dead needs to stay. I'd so much rather see Dark Depths unbanned than Field of the Dead. It's just such a miserable card. And Astrolabe can rot. That is just an abomination. It feels to me like it's in the same category as Gataxian Probe, where it's just doing too much stuff for not enough cost and like not a fun enough thing that it's worth having, if that makes sense. It's just like so free on so many levels, and it's not that fun of a card. It's not like someone's like, oh, I want to play the Astrolabe deck because I love Astrolabe decks. It's like you put Astrolabe in your deck because the other cards are fun and cool, but Astrolabe is just like kind of free broken enabler thing.
Yeah, I feel like for Astrolabe to exist, like so many other cards need to go away.
Yep. It would be so good. Four color Yorion getting Ashley back is just not. No, we don't need that right now.
Of course, I just want Faithless Looting and Splinter Twin back. I don't think any of those are ever going to happen. I don't know.
I could see looting maybe coming back. I don't hate it. I kind of liked what they tried to do by like printing these like sort of like 2-mana lootings. Like they've done Faithful Mending and just like Faithless Salvaging. Like they've been like kind of trying to give it to you without like actually giving it to you. And those ones aren't there yet. So I think we're a little bit a ways, but I would like to see maybe like their next attempt, because I don't know if we need looting back, because the flashback on looting was always pretty heinous in my opinion. But I would like to see like a careful study reprint coming to Modern in the near future. Maybe just a red draw 2, discard 2 without the flashback.
Oh, just the color shifted?
Yeah, like I think that could be a card that Modern could handle.
We'd actually been back during the Modern Horizons. Both sets were kind of like maybe careful study will end up, maybe they'll print it into the format. Maybe someday.
Yeah, I'm really surprised they didn't, but maybe that's Modern Horizons 3. I guess it's very possible that it is.
All right. Well, listeners, if you have a problem with anything that we've said here in the banned area, tweet at us, sound off in the comments, as they say on the internet. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff to consider. There's a lot of cards on the Modern banned list. Yeah. So I imagine eventually, sometime soon, something's going to come off this list. I don't know what it is, but.
Yeah, if you liked our takes, tweet at the Dive Down. If you want to get in a fight, tweet at A22EN. That's Zach Allen on Twitter.
Let's throw it down. GTA should be unbanned. Let's go.
I can't believe that Mystic Sanctuary and Once Upon a Time are on Manguchi's Consider with Caution list. Honestly, I'm like, those cards are too good.
Yeah, no. Mystic Sanctuary is fine. Just let me play with Mystic Sanctuary again. I would really appreciate it.
Oh, Stan would appreciate it too. I liked playing with Mystic Sanctuary, but
oh gosh,
that was rough.
Yeah, people just hate playing against control.
Yeah, that card needs to go away. But if they want to, like, Mystic Sanctuary is in like the one card on the list I was looking at. It was like, yeah, I know that one's not okay, but if they unbanned it, like, I'd be really happy. So I can maybe get behind it, but it probably shouldn't be unbanned.
I'm looking at this list right now. Last thing on this is I've been, I'm about to finish my basement, and I have all these banned cards, and I was gonna make just like a big card holder behind me to be my backdrop that's just 4 of all the cards that I have in this list that are banned, which is like way too many of them I have to put in here. Oko, yep, etc., etc.
Oh, I had so many of these foil too.
Did you?
Really sad. Such is life, though.
Zach, this was so much fun. It's always a pleasure to be able to tap into your brain and experience and kind of hear what you're thinking about formats and decks. And this was really valuable for me. And I hope our listeners got a lot of it as well. Before we let you go, where can people find you on the internet?
Sure. So you just mentioned it, but you can find me at A22EN. I'm not really making content right now. I've been trying to run a store recently. I guess maybe you can find some content next week on Twitch. I think it's going to be broadcast on the Swish Gaming's YouTube channel. So you'll be able to see some Modern next week if you want to do that. But that's basically the only place I'm at right now. I guess you can find me sometimes on the Dive Down.
Well, we hope so. We'd love to have you back for sure. So appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Maybe the next time we chat, it'll actually be in person. I can put a mic in your face. And are you coming to Mundaline?
Oh, absolutely.
Next
yeah.
trial?
I'm not trying to brag. I just had such a good week at the last NRG that I just put myself in this like leaderboard spot where it's just unexcusable for me to just not show up to the next ones, because it would like
right.
I guess that's one other thing I wanted to mention, because now that you guys are partnered with NRG, and it's a tournament I started to dedicate a lot more time to. I guess we should shout them out too, because you can find me there on their coverage. They've been putting me on. I really appreciate that. But they've been doing such a good job with their circuit. It really was, I started going after COVID. I didn't even take them seriously before COVID, to be quite honest. I started going after COVID, and the first couple I went to, you could tell they were new to it. They were still trying to get their feet wet, trying to figure out how to go about running a successful tournament series. And I just feel like the work they've put in since the beginning of, I guess, organized play returned after COVID, they've just really, really upped their game. They're putting on a great show over there. They're just doing a really good job with it, and I've really appreciated how they run the events, and how professional and smooth they run, and it's just been a really good time. So I need a good reason to skip them at this point. They're just great run events that do a lot for the Magic community, and they're a ton of fun. So
Yeah, we agree. I mean, like we said, I wasn't kidding when I said earlier that I really think that Norm and the team at NRG are really doing a great service to saving paper competitive Magic, specifically in the Midwest right now. But I think just generally, it's been great to watch. It's been great to see the caliber of players that have been showing up. You and everybody else in the top 20, 30 of this leaderboard is just stacked with well-known players, great players. That's great to see on coverage again. So,
Well, and I will say too, like at first when we first started playing these 6-7 months ago or whatever, it really was just a Midwestern thing. But they've been doing such a good job lately. I'm starting to get messages from players that like I played with on the SCG tour a while ago, saying, "Well, wait a minute, we're starting to take note. Like they're putting on a real show over there. Like maybe it's time we start traveling to these." And I think the momentum is there. I think people are really excited about the circuit, and I think you're going to start seeing them expand too. I think their schedule shows they're starting to go a little bit further in their range of like where they're going to schedule events. And it just feels like it's got all the upward momentum right now. It's just really cool to see what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's nice that their events are like 6 weeks apart too. I think that also makes it a little easier to like start to travel to one and the other rather than like in the heyday of SCG. It was every weekend.
Oh my god, I can't. Yeah, no, the SCG. I loved SCG. Don't get me wrong. And for what it was back in the day, it was this truly special place for Magic, in my opinion. I'm sad it's gone, but if there was ever one complaint I had about the SCG tour when I was on it was, yes, the events were like too frequently together. It was so tough to make it to them, and especially like the one year I tried to qualify for their Players Championship. I just remember the last half of the season just being just a grind, man, just awful. You'd want to skip events, but you just couldn't. And there was an event like every other week, basically, and just so much Magic. But
and travel,
you're right
too. Yeah.
At least back then it was a little cheaper, so that was nice. But the way NRG's doing it right now is great. I haven't talked to a person who's gone to one and thought it was a bad time yet, which is rare because when you put that many people in one place, like someone's going to have a bad time and probably have a negative experience. Like it's just bound to happen, and it just doesn't really feel like it is happening. So I don't know. I'm enjoying it.
Well, you can't get a much better endorsement than that.
Yeah, and of course it's a very biased endorsement from the number one seat in the leaderboard. But who else would you rather hear from than the person who's doing best?
Well, I mean, you can say it's biased, but like I'm number one because of that, right? Like I wouldn't be going to the events if they weren't good. I mean, that's just the reality. Like there's an SCG this weekend and I didn't travel to it, which says a lot because 3 years ago there wasn't a chance in hell I was going to miss an SCG. So the fact that I just skipped one because I'm preparing for the NRGs, I think says something to a lot of people, just who would know my past about wanting to go to these SCG events. So yeah, that's the reality of Magic in 2022.
Love to hear it. Well, thank you again, Zach. Always a pleasure. Excited to see you soon. I do think that wraps up this week's show. If you haven't yet out there, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. Get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. Make sure to check out Zach Allen over on Twitter at A22EN. It's like Allen, but instead of ones, it's twos. Beautiful. Absolutely brilliant. You can also reach us on Twitter at thedivedown, all one word. You can email us, thedivedown@gmail.com. Of course, you can support the show over on Patreon, patreon.com/thedivedown. You can also support us while playing Magic online with the Mana Trader sub. Get 15% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards using promo code thedivedown15. You can also support your own paper play by buying cards from Nerd Rage Gaming. If you use promo code DIVE8, get 8% off every purchase of cards over at Nerd Rage. Of course, you can also support us with some fine grooming products at Barrister & Mann. The Dive Down 15 gets you 15% off your first order over at Barrister & Mann as well. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and play more Modern